everybody. My name is Jack Zients. On Twitter, I go by the nickname Adne Sada. I am the Jewish monster hunter. I just got back from Detroit where I gave a presentation at the Michigan Limmud called Practical Jewish Monster Hunting. And since a lot of folks on Twitter were sad that they couldn't go in person and that it wasn't being streamed, here I am recording the video. Hopefully everybody will find this interesting. So to just kind of jump right in, we're talking about practical Jewish monster hunting from a Jewish perspective. My expectation when I gave the presentation, I kind of teased the audience and pointed to two or three of them to kind of get them in the mood and said, hey, Stephen, I'm so sorry to hear about the dybbuk that got possessed your niece. I'm so glad that went well. And to another woman, I had said, hey, I saw in your sign-up form that you have a boss and you're pretty sure your boss is a shape-changing shadim. That totally happens. Let's talk. And I kind of introduced to the audience that there is this world outside of our world, according to our tradition, that has these monsters and magic and creatures, and that everybody was there to learn a little bit about it. And I wanted to stress, this is like a 101 class. This was just to kind of get people into the mood, help them understand a little bit about what's going on. But this is definitely not a pro class. I would strongly encourage that nobody should go out based on what they learned in this class and actually start monster hunting. That would not be a good plan. This is just kind of an intro level. All right, so with that said, let's just get going. So the first most important thing that I have to stress is that when we talk about monster hunting in Judaism, we have to be very careful of what we mean by hunting. So first of all, as Jews, we don't hunt for sport. We don't go out big game hunting. We don't put trophies on the wall. We're even uncomfortable about hunting for food because we hate cruelty. We love mercy. This is not the Jewish way. That said, we absolutely have the right and the ability to protect ourselves. Protecting ourselves is very much part of Judaism. And when we think about monster hunting, I'm thinking about it in a protection perspective. How do we protect our homes, our communities from shadim, werewolves, and all of the rest? Not how do we go hunt for sport. An important part of that is that monsters, while they may be a threat, are not evil. Judaism doesn't have quite the same understanding of evil as, say, Christianity. In Judaism, shadim and these other monsters are still God's creation. They're still under God's auspices, and they have their own halakha and role to play. They are not evil any more than, say, an angry tiger or shark is evil. I'm certainly scared to death of both of them. I would not want to I wouldn't want a shark coming after me, but that's not evil. That's just, they're a threat. But importantly, just as importantly, and we're going to talk about this more in there, they are not always a threat. When I say they have their own halakha, according to our tradition, there are shadim, demons, who were Torah scholars, Talmud scholars, who would argue and learn with the Jewish rabbis. There are all sorts of folk stories about shadim who are actually better Jews than the Jews are, right? So we shouldn't go into this with this idea that everything that is different is evil or everything that is different is a threat. We need to be able to engage and understand and go from there. And so the final kind of key point is what we need to be able to do is avoid trouble, talk first and understand, and only take action when it's necessary. And there are going to be times where it's necessary. That's what we're here to talk about today. So we'll jump right in. One of the key things to understand is that the Jewish tradition, the Jewish rabbis, the Jewish people absolutely believe and have believed for thousands of years that demons are real, shadim are real. I'm going to use the word shadim as we go through, but understand that this means demons, but again, not quite in a Christian sense, but in a Jewish sense. So in Berachot, in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, Rav Huna said, each and every one of us has 1,000 demons to his left and 1,000 demons to his right. So first of all, clearly that's a lot of demons. And second of all, if you look to your right and your left, you're not going to see them right now. So what's up with that? So the idea here is that they are there. They are physically real, but they are invisible. They're intangible most of the time. Demons are without form unless they have a need to have form. So don't mistake it. There are demons out there everywhere. This is what the Jewish tradition teaches us. But most of the time, we're not interacting with them in any meaningful way, which is good. But don't think that we're talking about metaphors here or illusions here. The Jewish tradition was absolutely scared of demons, and demons are very real to the tradition. We could spend hours talking about what a demon is, what a shade is. And in fact, if you want to do that, there's an amazing podcast called Throwing Shade that you can find wherever you get your podcasts that spends, 40 to 50 hours talking about shadim, and it is absolutely amazing. You should go check it out. But for the moment, I just want to make a point, pulling again from the Mishnah, to kind of help situate shadim a little bit. So first, in Chagiga 16a, the rabbis say that there are 3 ways in which a shade is like a ministering angel, and there are 3 ways in which they are not, which they are more like people. And I think this helps kind of bracket them for us. First of all, like angels, they have wings, they can fly, and they can fly very, very fast, and they get to know what will be in the future. In this way, they are like angels. And by the way, how do they get to know what's in the future bit? Well, again, according to the Talmud and other writings, angels and demons both have access to God. Not that they're necessarily hanging out with God, but they can kind of listen through the curtain and hear what's going on with God, and through that way get God's understanding of what will happen in the future. It's a limited understanding, but much more than we humans have. So there are 3 ways in which they're like humans, though. They eat, and they drink, they multiply, they have children, and they die. So they're mortal, right? They can be hurt. They have their own body material needs. And in that way, they're very different from the angels. And in fact, there are only 1 or 2 demons that I'm aware of that are actually immortal, and it's a real problem for them. It's something that they didn't ask for, didn't want, and it doesn't work out badly for them. And there's not time in this talk to kind of get into the immortal demons, but it's a problem. And so I just want to say those are the kind of ways in which they're similar to us and to angels. The other point that I want to make, just before we get off of this, is super important, is that they can change shape. I told you I was teasing one of the women at the talk that she thinks her boss is a shade, and that they could they can look like a person except for their feet. Their feet are chicken feet. They can't change that. According to the lore, they are stuck with it. There's wonderful stories about Ashmedai, the demon king, and that's one of the ways in which he gets found out when he's being tricky. So they can change shape. They're invisible a lot. They can fly around, but they've got chicken feet. You can always kind of catch them out that way. And don't underestimate the they can eat, drink, and die aspect. This is a lot about what we think about as demons. So we could talk for hours about all different kinds of demons and all these details, but we don't really have time. And so I want to jump to one of the big bads. There's a small number of named demons, at least a dozen and a half, that would be great to spend time in another talk going over. But we're going to start with who's arguably the most famous and notorious demon, who's Lilith. So Lilith is the queen of demons. She seduces men, she kills babies. Jews have lived in fear of Lilith for thousands of years. But it's important as we understand like how scared we are of her to understand a little bit about her psychology and who Lilith is. According to the Torah, Adam had two wives. There was a wife, the first wife, according to Genesis, was made of dirt, of dust, of clay, at the same time Adam was. In a different part of Genesis, in the second retelling of Genesis, Adam's helpmeet, his mate, is created out of bone, out of him. This is where the rabbis come to the understanding that there were two wives, and Lilith is the first wife. She was created from earth with Adam as Adam's equal, intended to be his equal in every way, except that Adam couldn't handle that she was going to be equal. She would not be subservient to him, and she fled the garden. Big move that she made there. Adam goes and complains to God, hey, God, this woman, whatever she is, was supposed to be my partner here. She's like not doing what I want her to do. She's out of here. Could you go get her back? So God sends 3 angels to go bring her back, and this is where the story gets wild. Lilith makes a choice. She makes a choice, and she articulates this choice to the angels. And that choice is that she refused to go back to Adam. She refused to be underneath him, both metaphorically and sexually. That was very, very clear in the story. But she understood that by breaking away from the garden, she is losing what it meant to be human, and she's becoming something else. And what she becomes is a demon, whose now her goals are to have lots of demon babies. This is one of the origin stories of where shadim come from. By the way, there's at least 4 other really great ones. So she's having to have lots of shadim children, and she hates humans and human children, and so she will go and seduce men and kill babies. And so when we say that Jews have been terrified of Lilith, it's mostly around these two ideas, that in the first few days of life of a baby, that baby is very vulnerable, and we need to protect that baby from Lilith. And also, let's say single impressionable young men should not be left to their own devices because Lilith might get involved. And again, lots of stories about that we don't necessarily have time for. So Lilith is very representative of a big bad demon in this kind of both spiritual and psychological backstory. They all have them, but also in the sense that even though she's tough, she's a major demon, she can still be stopped. So part of the deal that she made with the angels was that she would take on limits, and if a Jew put up an amulet that had the names of those 3 angels, she would remember her promise to the angels and spare that family. That tradition of Lilith amulets has been not only well documented in Jewish history, but it's still a thing right now. So right now you're seeing on your screen 2 of these amulets. The first one comes from the Sefer Raziel. This is a major work of Jewish magic. This is a historical one. Those 3 weird little chicken guys actually represent the angels. Not quite sure where the chicken dude equals angel thing came from, but those are, so that's a very traditional way they're represented. And now this one that I'm showing right now is actually like $2 from Eichler's in New York, and you can buy it online. And the reason why they sell them is because some Jewish families, will hang this kind of a anti-Lilith amulet up in the hospital or wherever it is that the mother is giving birth to the baby, and then in the baby's nursery or in their bedroom up until I think 7 or 8 days, depending on the tradition. And I want to pause there just to kind of dwell on that for a second. I just said that, like, this one is available at Eichler's. You can go buy one. Like, I want that to, like, kind of sink in for a second. This is a living tradition. I'm not talking about something that was done by our great grandparents and is long gone. It's something that we still do, and I see we in a broad sense of Judaism. And I'm not saying what my family did or my friends' families have done. I'm saying if there are Jews all across the world that do these kinds of things, it's still very much a living tradition. And it, as a living tradition, it also has some psychological weight. I did not hang a Lilith amulet up when either of my two daughters were born, and I'm kind of sorry that I didn't. I didn't know about them at the time. But as a dad and my wife as a mom, we came home with our first daughter, and she was this magical little creature that we were convinced was going to die at like any moment. There was no way that we could like keep her alive, this little thing. But over time, she grew a little bit. We got a little more confident, and it really would have been a lovely thing to have had that amulet on the wall and then taken it down, whether it was a week later or whenever, as a way to kind of show our confidence that we made it through that really scary first week period. And so, whether, like some Jews, you accept that Lilith is a real shadim, or whether you are looking at this more in a metaphorical perspective, these kinds of traditions are still alive for a reason. They have spiritual and psychological weight that we sometimes forget about. Okay, that's Lilith. Someday I'd love to do like an hour talk about Lilith. We could easily talk for hours about her. She's absolutely amazing, and so much lore around her and so many different perspectives on her. But moving on. Dybbukim, and ghosts. Judaism has a very long and complicated view of what happens to us after we die. There are, again, something that we can talk about for hours, but there's a general understanding that there is some kind of world to come. How we get there, who gets there, all the details of that have been argued by the rabbis for generations and generations. But part of that is that we have always been, as a religion, anxious about what happens after we die, and as a people. One of the ways that anxiety plays out is the understanding that ghosts, who are the spirit of people who died, linger by their graves. There's different versions of exactly how long. There's some versions that say that people can feel pain for the first 3 days after they're dead, others not. But there's this idea that ghosts, as these spirits, can linger for a while. There's a wonderful Ashkenazi story of a young woman who came from a poor family, who was not buried not buried properly. She was wrapped in a shawl, but not in a nice dress, and she was able to get a message through to her family that she felt uncomfortable congregating with the other ghosts in the graveyard because she was effectively naked, only with the shawl and without a dress. And so they reburied her with a dress, and she was fine. This idea of ghosts being these spirits that linger also get to some great Jewish traditions around like never going straight home from a graveyard, always taking a zigzag path or stopping at a place so ghosts can't find you. But also, this is one of the places where the idea of placing stones, little rocks, on people's gravestones come from, which is to add weight to hold the ghost in place. Again, like the Lilith amulet, I just want to dwell on that a second. In modern Judaism, we often have much more contemporary interpretations of things like rocks on gravestones that take out this fear of death and take out this idea of ghosts. But this is one of the places where that actually came from. Okay? So what's a dybbuk? A dybbuk is either a ghost or a shadim who has possessed a human. So the ghost has gone into the human and taken over the human. This leads to terrible things for the human, and we need to do something about it. So this is like the first of like the real monster hunting things. Once you get past like defending against Lilith, and I want to stress that the first thing you need to do is talk to them. There's all sorts of lore of the great exorcists who would sit and talk with the possessed to understand, first, are they a demon or are they a ghost? And why are they there? Like, this is not really where a ghost should be or where a demon should be. They often need help, and they will often leave the body voluntarily, or at least can be coaxed out by a skilled exorcist who helps them resolve whatever issues they have, helps elevate their soul, elevate their spirit, and get them to Gehenna or to the world to come, which is where they really should be. That doesn't always work. We're going to talk a lot more about exorcisms in a couple of minutes. You'll need to get good at doing a real exorcism. You can't always just kind of coax them out and get them to go. But it's a great place to start. And again, talking is such a Jewish experience. Let's have a cup of tea. Let's understand who we are. Let's talk about this. Okay? Werewolves and estries. Okay, so we've been talking about demons. We've talked a bit about ghosts and about dybbuks. Werewolves and estries are a different kind of thing. In both cases, typically, you'll hear me say typically a lot because the Jewish religion and Jewish culture, we're really good on commentary. We're not very good at taxonomy. There's lots of different arguing interpretations and arguing definitions, which personally I love, but it means I can never say exactly what something is. But typically, both werewolves and estries are people who have been cursed through a potion, an amulet, a ring, and turned into something else. So typically werewolves are men. There's one of the classic stories of a Jewish werewolf was actually a rabbi who was turned into a wolf through a magic ring. Estries are women who are, we often, in the English translations, are often described as witches. I get very anxious about that term because it doesn't really connect with a lot of modern ideas about witches, but it's the word that's often used in English. An estrie is a woman who is a cursed woman who has become angry and vicious, who will kill and potentially drink blood. The estries kind of connect up with vampire legends as well, though again, I don't like to use the word vampire because again, it brings in a lot of connotations that don't really matter here. The important thing is that they're very dangerous, and they're kind of powerful. They're not shadim powerful, but they can fly and they can do damage. But like I said, these are often good people who are cursed. Sometimes they're absolute scummy sinners who have been cursed, but often not, which means there's a certain responsibility we have of trying to get them uncursed if possible. And it's not always possible. Like I said before, this is Monster Hunting 101. Please don't go out and try to tackle an estrie or a werewolf just based on what you're hearing in this talk. There's not nearly enough information. But I do want to kind of share a couple of quick pro tips just in case you're stuck dealing with a werewolf or estrie and you find yourself in this moment. So, as I said earlier about shade and ghosts, like, as much as they're kind of badasses, they're not that powerful. So, for example, the Baal Shem Tov, who was a Baal Shem, a wonder worker who started the whole Hasidic movement in Eastern Europe, amazing stories about the Baal Shem Tov. He beat up the werewolf with a stick to defend his religious school students. Now, we're not the best. I'm willing, if the best does something, that doesn't mean your average person can do it. But still, holy guy, wonder rabbi, stick. We're not talking you needed a tank to do this. Okay? Same thing with estries. Excuse me, estries, a lot of their power comes from their hair. That's how they fly, is using their hair. And so one way to help take away their power is to bind up their hair. And yeah, I'm just talking about giving her a hair tie or getting a hair tie onto her hair, and will kind of depower her and a lot. The other thing I'll mention about estries is, again, they're not that powerful. Killing an estrie is easy if that's the thing that needs to happen, but it's getting the estrie to stay dead that's a problem. The understanding about estries is that once they've drunk the blood of people, they'll just come back after you bury them. And so you have to bury the estrie with a stone in her mouth. That is what the lore says to do to keep her from coming back. And I want to pause there for a second and say, we can believe or not whether werewolves or estries have ever actually existed, but there is archaeological digs that have found women, 600s, 800 years old, and since they've died, buried with rocks in their mouths. So our great grandparents, going back to the 12th and 13th century in particular, absolutely believed that this was true, for better or worse. And I want to make this point that we are not talking fiction in a modern fiction sense. Everything that I'm talking about right now comes directly out of religious writings, not just campfire folklore. Sometimes folklore gets this bad rap of it's just stories around the campfire. These are all coming directly from Jewish religious writings. Werewolves and estries in particular coming from a text called the Sefer Hasidim, which are the German pietists. Don't connect them with contemporary, the Hasid movement, very different kind of people. But a Jewish movement in the Ashkenaz area in the 12th and 13th century. Werewolves and estries were a big part of their worldview, and this idea that people can transmute and change. And they actually were thinking a lot about stories from the Torah and the Talmud about people who turned into Enoch turning into an angel. How would that work? Well, let's think about that in terms of how werewolves and estries change. So the lore here, again, is really deep. Okay, there are so many more interesting critters, and we can go into so much more detail, but this is supposed to be an hour talk or thereabouts. So I'm going to pause there, and we're going to start talking about defensive techniques. Okay, so what do you do, particularly for shadim, if you're in a situation where you have to deal with them? There are three main techniques and one caveat, and we'll start with the caveat. The caveat is, don't defend, just get away. So our tradition is really clear. Stay out of the ruins, stay out of the wastelands. That is where the shadim live. And when I say ruins and wastelands, I don't necessarily just mean like out in this forest, or that ruins are like the Parthenon in Greece or Stonehenge, some fallen down buildings. If you're in there are plenty of neighborhoods I live in Michigan. There are plenty of Rust Belt cities not far from here that have their own different kinds of ruins, burnt out houses that have yet to be torn down and renovated. Those are just as much a blight as anything else out there, and perfect places for shadim to live. So stay out of there. Also, be wary of bathrooms and cellars. These are places where we don't spend a lot of time, and we tend to be at our most vulnerable when we're there. So be careful there. By the way, my lion friend here on the right is the Shrika panda. That is a Jewish outhouse demon or bathroom demon. According to the Talmud, looks a bit like a lion and will hang out around outhouses and bathrooms just to get you when you're at your most vulnerable. So the rabbis are very concerned about these kinds of places. But generally, the understanding is if you don't think about the shadim, if you don't go to places where shadim are likely to be, you're going to be fine, usually. Like, don't mess with them. They're not going to mess with you. This connection sounds like what you might say to somebody about a shark or a tiger. It's the same kind of thing. Give them their space. You're good. They also have a note of be protected in your community, right? Wear tefillin, if that's your practice. Hang mezuzah. Be around Torahs as often as you can, because all of these trappings that have the name of God in them all have their own protection from shadim vibe that goes along with them. They will all help you do that. Do all that, and hopefully you and your families won't have to deal with any more practical measures. But we're here to train as monster hunters, therefore we are all about practical measures. So let's just get to the practical measures. Okay? So, number one, if you gotta fight. So no beating around the bush. There are times where we're going to need to throw down with shadim, and so let's go do it. So first of all, there's a set of basic skills and basic tools that you have. And I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to put up a picture of some of my basic shadim tools. But noises, scents, torches, salt, iron are all very effective weapons. Particularly iron is a mark of civilization. It's something that shadim are afraid of. And when I talk about iron, Jewish communities, I'm not talking about having like buildings made out of iron or clubs made out of iron. Even just wearing an iron pin, like a little hat pin or a cloak pin stuck in your shirt as you're kind of wandering around will help scoot them away. Certainly, the cars we drive in have more than enough iron to keep shadim at bay. Torches, light candles, all of these things that make it brighter and more human-like are things that kind of will freak out a shade and scare them away. And also, memorize Psalm 91, the Monster Hunter Psalm. This is classically a psalm that is used to protect people from shadim and to kind of get them to back off. And I hope you kind of catch the vibe here. None of these are things that are intended to really hurt a shade. That's not the goal. The goal here is to aggressively go and get them to go back, to kind of push back. Now, there's also kind of more advanced stuff here. They're to either control, banish, or kill a shadim. This is definitely pro-territory. Don't try to get into this anytime soon. First of all, there are spells and amulets and other uses of psalms that all based around the names of God and angels that are intended to control, banish, or kill. We'll talk more about spells and amulets, and if you just want to pause there for seconds, when I say spells, yeah, but I really do mean spell books. We're going to get to spell books in a minute. Okay? Also, there are, to use the Dungeons & Dragons term, magic items that are really great for dealing with shadim. Unfortunately, they're kind of lost to our history. King Solomon had a ring that helped him control shadim, and Methuselah had a magic sword that allowed him to kill thousands of shadim. But unfortunately, both of these are lost to history, not expecting us to find them anytime soon. So, okay, basic and advanced skills about dealing with shadim if you got to fight them back. So, step 1, fight. Or option 1, fight. Option 2 is bribe them. Bribing. Shadim love jam. Wheat, milk, oil, nuts, whatever you got, giving them a gift is great, but in particular, shadims love jam. It's important, as we're talking about giving them jam, though, that we have to do it in the right spirit. We're Jews. We worship God. We do not give offerings to idols. We don't give offerings to shadim. Giving them jam is not an offering in a religious context. It's hospitality. It's with the goal of conciliation. The goal of this bribery is to establish a relationship in which things can get worked out and to get you on their good side. Do not ever think about this as any kind of gift, as like an offering. That will not go well at all. And it's also worth noting that bribery is generally best when dealing with the less powerful shadim. You're not going to get anywhere giving jam to Lilith, okay? But half shadim, lantuch, which are hobgoblins, shredali, which are elves, and by elves I mean the kind of classic fairy tale, the elves will sneak in and shoot your horses and make thread for you if you leave out a saucer of milk, those kinds of elves. I'm not talking about Orlando Bloom. This is not Lord of the Rings elves, okay? So, but anyway, shadim like jam, keep jam handy. Bribes. Bribes are good. All right, topic 3. Deceive them. So why are shadim messing with humans in the first place? Well, typically, from the lowest all the way up to Lilith the highest, they are often jealous. They're jealous of our place under God. They're jealous of our real physical bodies. They have these halfway kind of shifty bodies, but not real bodies. And they're jealous of the happiness that we have, and they want to make us miserable. So what we need to do is fool them into thinking that we are miserable, even on the happiest of occasions. So crying and wailing, wearing ashes or dirty, torn clothes, And just generally being humble and not attracting attention to yourself is a great way to deceive them. And by the way, we're not going to talk about the evil eye very much in this talk because that's a whole different thing. But there's a whole tradition around the evil eye, which is very much based on the same idea of being humble, not attracting attention. If you talk to a Hasidic Jew and you ask them how they are, they're more likely just to say, Baruch Hashem, praise God, than they are to answer that question because they don't want to in any way look like they're doing better than they are in a way that will attract attention. You don't go praise your children because that will potentially get demons or the evil eye to come to go for your kids. Like that's be humble and fine. But the last thing is the thing I want to kind of point to before we hop, which is breaking a glass at a wedding, right? You're at a wedding, everything is going great, you're going to break the glass. There's all these reasons that get put forth about why Jews break glass. Most of them are kind of really hard to get your head around, like things like, may your marriage stay together in the way that this glass doesn't, which is one that got told to me at one point. And these things don't really make a lot of sense because what it really does, it really goes back to this idea of deception of shadim at weddings. You're breaking the glass to show that you're not being as happy and frivolous. And by the way, before anybody says I'm making this up, this is literally right out of the Talmud. There's a big discussion about rabbis who are breaking glasses at weddings because people are being too frivolous, and it's right inside of a discussion about shadim. If anybody is interested, I can get them the citations. It's a great set of passages. So, okay, those are the three main things plus the caveat. The caveat is just stay away from them if you can. If you can't, then you need to fight, bribe, or deceive. And all three are good tactics, and they all can be used together if necessary, but they give you kind of a range of opportunities for dealing with shadim. Okay. Tools. Now, I've put up a couple of images of some of my tool sets as we've been going through, but I want to kind of dig a bit deeper here. So the first kind of tools that I want to talk about are amulets. So an amulet is some kind of writing that invokes the power of God or an angel's name for some kind of practical effect. Every word I just said can be argued. Remember I said that Jews are good at commentary more than taxonomy. There's different views on amulets, but we have long history of amulets going back thousands of years, and they all more or less fit that kind of pattern. The important thing here is the kavanah of the spirit, the intention of the whoever is making the amulet, and the way that with the words that are used, the names of God, the materials are more of a practical matter. So you can make an amulet out of metal, and there are lots of great examples of Jewish metal amulets, but you need a metalsmith. It's more expensive, it takes more time. They're more typically done on what's called cloth, K-L-A-F, cloth. Cloth is the kind of kosher parchment that Torahs and mezuzah and the tefillin scrolls are made on. Relatively speaking, it's cheap, it's kosher, it's easy to get your hands on. I'm going to put up an image of my personal amulet kit. I'll be clear, I have a kit, I don't use it. My Hebrew and my penmanship are nowhere near up to the task, but it's fun to just kind of have one on hand. So you can do it with metal or parchment, but there's a tradition of using leaves, particularly olive leaves, bone, animal bone, even gems. I mentioned before Solomon's ring. That was effectively an amulet that with the verbiage inscribed into the gem and the metal. So great, I want to, like I said a moment ago, for other things, this is still a living tradition. There are Jewish rabbis around the world who are still making amulets on a daily basis for their congregations. Not my rabbi, not my congregation. I'm in a typical liberal American synagogue where my rabbi would absolutely not be interested in making amulets, but there are absolutely, if you go to the more Orthodox or particularly Hasidic communities, the Haredi communities in Israel, amulets are still a thing. And this is an example of that. The one on the right there, that's actually one that I own, is an amulet to prevent COVID. I bought it on eBay. It was about $70. You can go buy one too. They sell them by the boatload. I want to be really clear. I don't know whether that amulet was made by a rabbi with the intention of supporting his community, or if it was made by some joker who thought he could make a buck on the tourist trade by selling these on eBay. Could have gone either way, but I thought it was too cool not to go get one, just to kind of have in my collection. But it's representative of amulets that are being made today. There was a stink in Israel a couple of years back where Shas, the religious party, was handing out political flyers that on one side was all about like the political candidate they wanted you to vote for, and on the other side was an amulet. And so people were taking it because of the amulet, and that kind of ruffled a lot of feathers in Israel. But it's still a thing. So as a monster hunter, you need to have amulets, and you need to know somebody who can make them, whether it's if you can develop those skills, that's great, or you can get a friendly rabbi on speed dial who can make you the amulets. And amulets can do a wide range of effects, which we'll talk about a bit more in a moment. Oops. So the next thing I want to talk about is what's called practical Kabbalah. Now, again, this is a topic that we could spend an entire hour talking about. There's this wide range of different kinds of magical practices that fall under Kabbalah, what's called practical Kabbalah, including amulets. But I mostly want to talk about exorcisms for a minute. Because remember I said earlier in this talk that if you're gonna run into a dybbuk, you better be ready to do an exorcism if the kind of talking and coaxing part doesn't work out. But you got to start there. You got to start with talking. You got to start with healing it if you can. But you need to be ready if that doesn't work. And I want to warn you, even for the best rabbis, exorcisms do not always work. And when they don't work, it can be catastrophic for the rabbi or for whoever's doing the exorcism, and it can be catastrophic for the person with who it is done to. So it is not something to be taken lightly at all. So I'm going to put up on the screen in a moment some pieces from my personal exorcism kit. Untested, have never had the need to do an exorcism myself. That's good. But you can see on the screen here a bunch of different kinds of steps in a typical exorcism. And there are lots of well-documented exorcism cases. There are lots of descriptions of different ways of doing exorcisms. And just to be clear, exorcisms are actually kind of on the rise right now. There's more exorcisms happening now than there were just post-World War II. It's still very much a part of certain parts of the Jewish community. So anyway, just the steps, you can read them for yourself, but I'll skim them real quick. You purify yourself, fasting, bathing, gathering a minyan. I mentioned interviewing the dybbuk, having that conversation, drawing a circle around the dybbuk, exposing the dybbuk to smoke or sulfur. But I said that scents are really important. If the dybbuk has told you what their name is, that's really important to include. A lot of praying. Psalm 91, as I mentioned before, is a good one, but there's a lot of other exorcism liturgy that you can include. Shofar, amulets, candles, these are all kind of part of the deal. And you also kind of need to have a bottle for the dybbuk to go into, otherwise it might possess another body. And I want to pause on that for 1 second, because nothing that makes me crazier. There's a lot of talk on the internet and movies lately of a dybbuk box. Dybbuk boxes are complete bullshit. It was come up with by an Etsy seller who wanted to make a buck, and now it's kind of become pop culture. And as a friend of mine mentioned not too long ago, what's the great thing about a dybbuk box? It's a way to include Jewish lore in a movie without having to have any Jews present, right? It kind of sounds exotic and Jewishy, but there are no Jews there because it's just the box. We're not talking about that. There's no sense in Jewish lore that if you catch a dybbuk in a bottle, that it will, if you open it, it has anything like a dybbuk box characteristic. It's there to catch them, you bury them, you're done. And when I say catch them, what is typically happens with the dybbuk is the dybbuk will come out of some hole in the body, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the urethra, what you got, right? Any one of these holes. So a lot of times there will be, a rabbi might like cut someone's toe to get a little bit of blood going. That counts. And you just kind of capture the dybbuk that way and go bury it. Very dangerous. Don't get into this until you absolutely have to. This is definitely pro-grade stuff, okay? But again, this is very much part of the lived tradition of a lot of Jews around the world, even if it's not part of like my community's tradition. Okay. Magic. We've already talked about amulets. We've talked about exorcism. But one of my favorite aspects of Jewish magic that's kind of worth talking about are grimoires. Like, yes, we actually have spell books. Like, whatever you're thinking and imagining a spell book is, yeah, we've got spell books that are like that. So let me describe 3 of them, just to kind of get you started on them. There are many others, but these are 3 of the most famous. So number 1 is the Sefer Yetzirah. According to tradition, the Sefer Yetzirah is a text that was narrated to Adam. Adam was credited with writing this down, and it described as a mystical description of how God used the Hebrew alphabet during creation. So when God created the universe, Hebrew was a part of that, and if God could use the Hebrew alphabet to create, so can we. And so the Sefer Yetzirah is a very mystical book, requires a little bit of guidance on how to understand it, but for a very, very long time, mastering the intricacies of the Sefer Yetzirah was considered baseline if you were going to be the kind of rabbi who did Kabbalah or did any of these kinds of magical effects. And again, there's lots of descriptions of this in the Talmud. And we're talking about creating, yeah, this is where golems come from. So any really legitimate Jewish description of golems is always going to be tied to the Sefer Yetzirah, whether it's directly mentioned in the text or not. It's this tradition where it's coming from. If this sounds in any way interesting, that book I've got on the screen there, Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation in Theory and Practice, edited by Aryeh Kaplan, must read. He does a masterful job walking through what's otherwise a very complicated text, which covers both the use of the Hebrew alphabet, but a lot of very early Hebrew astrology as well. Very readable. You're not going to understand it on the first pass. It takes a lot of work, but it's amazing, amazing stuff. Okay, the second one is the Sword of Moses. The Sword of Moses is literally the spell book you're thinking of, right? That has like a list of spells. If you want to do this, and it'll work. The Sword of Moses is based around this idea of the power of different names of God and angels, and how you can draw power from them. And I want to pause with that. When I say names of God, I don't necessarily mean names that a person would refer to God as. Many of these names are cryptic, encoded, or otherwise almost seem like random characters, but they are descriptions of aspects of God that have come down through these books that have a certain kind of power associated with them. Same with angels. So the Sword of Moses will say, okay, you have to purify yourself, you have to do these rituals, and then if you want to mess up the life of a blast demon, then you use these angel names, and you do this with a red plate at midnight, and that'll take care of it for you. And that's literally the way the book is set up. It is a Dungeons and Dragons spell book right there, and a big part of the Jewish magic tradition. Sefer Raziel Hamalach is another text. Ooh, did I just goof up Sefer Yetzirah and Sefer Raziel about which one was talked to Adam? Anyway, moving on. I think Sefer Yetzirah is not taught to Adam. Maybe I'll edit this out, or maybe I'll just look dumb. That's all right. Either way is fine. But anyway, Raziel Hamalach is a description of more of these angel names, uses of astrology, gematria, protective spells, lots and lots of magical ideas. One of the most famous Lilith amulets comes from this text as well. Pro-grade stuff, lots of study, but absolutely, absolutely fascinating. Okay, the last piece of magic that I want to talk to, which in some ways is my personal favorite, but is also kind of the least known and hardest to kind of get good sources around, is what's called segula or precante. Segula or segulot is Hebrew. It's like charms or remedies. And precante is Ladino from the Sephardic community, but they're basically kitchen table magic. So the amulets, the exorcisms, the spell books that I was just talking about, they are all rabbinic, and I'll say it, that means they're guys, right? These are the elite male intellectual rabbis who have done all of this stuff. And if you go back to the Talmud, there's this lovely passage where the rabbis complain that all the women in their lives are doing magic. And it was clear from the context they were not okay with that. This is what we're talking about, is mothers and daughters going back into antiquity, handing down magical charms and medical lore to take care of the spiritual problems that underlie daily life afflictions, right? These are everything from how to deal with blood loss to how to deal with the evil eye, all sorts of stuff. So like in my kit, I always make sure I keep cloves and lead as an evil eye protection coming right out of a Sephardic tradition. Sugar can be used for sickness. By the way, I mentioned blood loss. I don't know if you can see in the image the little balls over on the far left. That's rabbit poop. Totally good for blood loss, at least according to the tradition. And as I said, this stuff is less documented. There's a wonderful book called Ritual Medical Lore of the Sephardic. Oh shoot! I'll post it at the very end, the exact name of it. But really, really great stuff. But there's a lot more work to be done. There's no equivalent kind of text in the Ashkenazi tradition, but there are people who are doing that research. There's a great website called Pulling Threads right now, which is documenting things like how Ashkenazi women would measure out thread in the graveyard as a way to make candles. When you burn the candles, you can ask the dead for favors. You ask the dead to intercede on the behalf of the community. Absolutely amazing and wonderful stuff. Not nearly as documented as well. And again, I want to stress that these are all living traditions. These are things that are still being done in different corners of the Jewish community, and at least some of them, it would be lovely if they were better known more broadly, because they have kind of spiritual and psychological weight to them. Even if I might question how well a rabbit poop really does for blood loss, there probably are much better medical ways of handling that. But some of these things are, I think, brilliant. Okay, that is kind of the main topics that I wanted to cover for this talk. We kind of did a little bit on some of the scary critters, shadim, werewolves, estries, ghosts, and dybbuks. We talked about the 4 ways of dealing with them. Don't mess with them. Fight, bribe. Fight, bribe, or deceive them. Thank you. But I don't want to leave without talking about some of the more fun aspects too, because I don't want to give the idea that everything is scary, right? The middle world is absolutely amazing, and Jewish lore is filled with all of these absolutely amazing creatures and experiences that are just as real in the tradition as our fear of shadim and werewolves would be. So I haven't made slides for all of these, because each one, this would be another 15 slides, but I do want to run down the list really, really quick, because they're just wonderful. Angels. Judaism is really big on angels. Right now, in liberal communities, we don't like to talk about angels. There's always this tension, even in the Orthodox and Hasidic communities, that we don't want people to pray to angels. We want people to pray and worship God. Angels are just intermediaries. But they serve these very important roles in the lore, and protection is one of them. The whole idea of guardian angels very much comes from Judaism. It's not a big thing in Judaism anymore, but for a while it was. And we invoke angels in very specific ways, even in current liturgy. So if your synagogue or family has a tradition of singing Shalom Aleichem on Shabbat that is specifically invoking protective angels to oversee you and to help you get home safely. Okay? Giants. Giants are, I want to say giants are huge, but that's not. Okay, giants are huge. Both physically huge, but they're all over the Torah and the Talmud. Og, the king of Bashan, who tussled with Moses and who had fallen in love with Sarah and who had struck a bargain with Noah. I mean, one of the most amazing characters in Jewish lore. And giants are all over the lore. Like, just as an example, this kind of blows my mind. 3 different giant wars are chronicled in the Torah and the Talmud. Abraham fought giants. Moses and the Israelites during the Exodus fought with giants. And then King David, as Israel was a settled kingdom, fought and killed off the last of the giants, the last giant cities. All over. If you read the Torah the way the rabbis do, giants play this huge role in it. Adnei Sada. So those of you who follow me on Twitter, like obviously that's my Twitter handle. I love the Adnei Sada, and yeah, it's a vegetable ape. It's something that looks like an ape, but it's a vegetable. It's green and leafy, and it jumps around, and it will eat plants or small animals, and it's tethered to the ground by a vine. And I've always loved that image of both jumping around in excitement but also being tethered to the ground at the same time. Don't know what that says about my personal psychology, that's the thing that I gravitate toward, but I've always loved that image. Adnei Sada comes up in a number of different Jewish stories, and my favorite of them is that during the Exodus, when there's a reference to how the ground itself will rise up against the Egyptians, according to the rabbis, that clearly was referring to the Adnei Sada. There were Adnei Sada seeds all over, and that if Moses had given the word with the power of God, all of these seeds would have risen up, and you would have had Adnei Sada attacking Egyptian soldiers. Personally, I'm kind of disappointed that didn't make the cut, and that wasn't part of the Torah itself, but it's a great midrash. Unicorns. The Jewish tradition has unicorns. In our version of it, there are a small number of them, 2, that are really large, and they're as big as Mount Tabor. They are gorgeous, and they are tragic. Adam, according to one midrash, Adam actually sacrificed a unicorn during the first night. And just to understand that, put yourself in Adam and Eve's position. They were just created. The light was bright, and all of a sudden it starts getting dark and dark and darker, and they have no idea whether it's going to ever become light again. And so they do this, what I might think of as horrible, but they thought was absolutely appropriate thing of sacrificing a unicorn to God, telling God, you're so wonderful, you are going to bring the light back, right? And by the way, the spot in which they did that sacrifice is the same spot that Abraham was sent to sacrifice Isaac, which is also the same spot in Jerusalem where the temple is. There's something under the temple called, according to Jewish lore, called the foundation stone. The foundation stone is this like capstone that holds back the chaotic waters from creation, and that is the spot of both of those sacrifices and of the temple. I love how all these lore stories kind of come together. The ziz is another one of my favorites. The ziz is a bird that is so large that, according to one story, it was careless with its egg. Its egg rolled out of its nest, crushed 300 trees, broke open, and the yolk drowned 3 cities. It's a big bird. Seraphs, flying, burning serpents. So this is a great close read of the Torah. There's a section of Exodus where the Israelites were being ungrateful and cranky. Actually, I think that's almost all of Exodus, is that we were being ungrateful and cranky. But we were so ungrateful and cranky at this particular moment that God sent flying, burning, like serpents with wings that were kind of on fire to go kill the Israelites because he was so mad at us. And Moses did what Moses does best, which is to go to God and say, hey, God, do you really want to do that? You just went to all this trouble. You got the Israelites out. You told the Egyptians that the Israelites were your people, and now you're killing them with flying, burning snakes? And God's like, okay, I guess that was a bad call, but he didn't make the snakes go away. Once created, they were created. But what he did was he had Moses plant a post in the ground and had the craftsman make a bronze version of the seraphs. And anybody who was bit by one could go to this pole and be healed. And they could uproot the pole and take it with them. And they had this pole all the way up through the Israelite kingdom. And in the Israelite kingdom, it was eventually destroyed when the rabbis decided that people were actually worshiping the pole. The pole was just a way of channeling God's power. You weren't supposed to worship the pole, but the pole was getting worshipped, and so it was destroyed. Talking animals, hello, the Balaam's ass complaining about how come you've been beating me all day. Just absolutely fabulous. And the Tanin, the dragons. Like, yes, the Jewish tradition has dragons too. Little ones, big ones, and then one called Tali, Theli or Teli in English, which is the size of the universe and what the universe is held in position being hung on when you get into deep parts of Jewish astrology. So many amazing, amazing things that kind of counterbalance our understanding of the scary parts of shadim and dybbuks and exorcisms. It's not all about fighting demons. So anyway, I am going to stop on that note. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been listening, made it all the way through this talk about practical Jewish monster hunting. Like I said, my name is Jack Zients. I tweet at Adnei Sada on Twitter, and it's a super fun, super lively chat. I'm tweeting all the time, and I'm retweeting all sorts of fun, wonderful people. Including my buddy Ezra Rose, whose t-shirt I'm wearing right here. So I retweet Ezra Rose's art all the time. So go check it out. And hopefully next year, the plan is that I'm coming out with a set of Jewish monster hunting trading cards. There's going to be a Kickstarter sometime in probably mid-2023, supervised by Madness Heart Games, the publisher. I've got about 80 cards. I have like the first draft of about 80 cards, and I talk about the cards a lot, and I post first drafts of cards as they become done. Not all of them, but I probably have done posted maybe 20, 25 of the 80 that I've done, just ones that feel fun that I want to share and talk to people about. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I'll look forward to talking to you again later. Okay, this is me again, just breaking in here, just to clarify, the Sefer Yetzirah, according to our tradition, is attributed to our father Abraham, or sometimes to Rabbi Akiva. The Sefer Raziel HaMalach is attributed to Adam. Got a little wound up there, got a little carried away, but we're clear now, okay? Okay.